It's been a great journey. I've given you 60 favorite book recommendations, but now the fabled top 20. Hold on to your hats. Hey, thanks for joining me today. I'm Jim, the father of this show, Fantasy for the Ages, which I do with my son, talking about fantasy, science fiction, other nerdy things we enjoy. This is the fourth and final episode of this list of 80 books and series, today bringing you the best of the best. How do I know they are the absolute best like that? What puts these books in the top 20 is that each one was favorited by two or more of the 45 different content creators who contributed entries for this list. And these content creators, man, they're super knowledgeable individuals about books in this general genre space. This is what they spend their time digging into. We're talking about booktubers like The Beard of Darkness, Bryce at Centered Shelf, and Jonathan Cohen. Book bloggers like Jody at the Witty and Sarcastic Book Club, Mackenzie Reads, and Alex at Blog Spells. And even a few authors jumped in here like Darren Hanshaw and Philip Chase. These people know their fantasy and science fiction. Don't just believe me about this list. Trust their instincts. They know what makes a good book. And when I limited them to only 3 favorites, some of them are like, some of them slipped in honorable mentions, which didn't make the list, but they just couldn't help themselves. Still, I narrow them down to 3 only, and then we get this list of 80, but still some of them overlapped. We've got some that get entered by more than one person, even though they can only give me 3. The books that they overlapped on, we should perk up and listen and see what they had to say. So that's what the top 20 is. Again, all of these were recommended by 2 or more of these people. Now, again, I've used Goodreads to sort this list whenever there's a tie. For example, the first 9 books of the top 20 were favorited by just 2 contributors. So the fandom's ratings and reviews on Goodreads allowed me to sort those 9, put them in a rank that makes sense, and I think when you see how it comes out, you'll make sense too. Whether you love it or hate it over at Goodreads, it still can actually prove to be useful with the collective wisdom of fans. The overlaps on this list then increase as we reach the top part of the list. The top 2 were favorited by 8 different content creators. And only one of those is someone who actually favorited both of them. So there's a lot of different people who have had their hands in making this list be as awesome as it is. Now, before we even get into it, what do you think? Can you predict which 2 series that we haven't talked about at all yet are the ones sitting at the top? Go ahead, pause, ponder, maybe write it down, challenge yourself to see if you can come down with the right ones. And hey, give yourself bonus points if you get the right 2 and in the right order. Once I reach the end of the list, the fun will all be done. That'll be it. That's all, 80. So let me take a moment now to thank the final quarter of the contributors, the people who responded with their favorites, making this list possible. So we've got shout outs to Another Turning, YouTube channel, The Artsy Reader, a blogger, Book Reading Billy over there on YouTube, Books with Zara's YouTube channel, Bryce at Shelf Centered on YouTube. I love that one, Shelf Centered. Nice name, Bryce. Darren Hanshaw, sci-fi and fantasy author. Green Team of the Legendarium podcast. Mackenzie Reads, a book blogger. Morgan at Podcast of the Dragon, now available on YouTube. On Wednesdays We Read podcast. And the Shaggy Shepherd Book Reviews, a blogger. Be sure to check out the content of these awesome people. You'll find convenient links for each of them down in the show notes. Okay, I've got a power-packed top 20 for you today. I've already read 11 of the 20, but of course that means 9 of them I haven't yet. All but one of those was already on my TBR though. and I've corrected the oversight for the missing one. But these are mostly quite well known, established, recognized master works of science fiction and fantasy. Most of these are not going to surprise you, but how did they rank out in the order? And if there are a few that you don't know, even if it's just one, you're probably going to want to put it on your TBR. But let's do it. First off, the 9 that were chosen by 2 content creators. And we start with number 20, ranked according to Goodreads then amongst these 9. The 20th is Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. This is an epic fantasy trilogy that started in 1988 and finished up in 1993. There was a 1-book follow-up sequel that came out in 2017. It's kind of separate, but it's definitely tied into the original. This is said by many to have influenced numerous fantasy authors that followed. I haven't read this yet, but it's been on my TBR for a while and rising higher. Number 19, The Wars of Light and Shadow by Janny Wurts. This is an 11-book epic fantasy series. Starting in 1993, it ran through 2024. That's like this year. There are numerous years between various books, the longest gap being 7 years before book 10, and then the final book, which is the series conclusion that came out just this past May. That's a long time to make people wait, but it gives hope for these other series that are still out there dangling and we're waiting for extra books to come. Sometimes the author still comes through. This is one epic story broken up into separate books with time jumps between sections of books. Kind of broken up into like 5 different sections, but they all continue to build on the books that come before. So there you go, number 19 from Janny Wurts. Number 18, The Chronicles of the Black Company by Glenn Cook. This is epic military fantasy and considered a foundational part of the fantasy genre by many. This is a sort of series that doesn't necessarily need to end. It could just keep going on and on because it's not about any particular characters or one set story arc. Rather, it's about the military band known as the Black Company, whose composition changes as time goes by, but the Black Company is always there. This started out way back in 1984, and there are currently 9 core novels that Glenn Cook has written, and then a whole bunch of short stories and novellas. The most recent full novel was published back in 2000, but Cook has published more of these little things since then, and the most recent of his short stories came out just in 2019. In an interview back in 2005, Glenn Cook stated he had an intention to write 2 last Black Company novels, and he even had titles for them that he gave in the interview. But nothing's happened since. He had acknowledged at the time of the interview it was going to be a while before you'd see those books. He was busy with other projects, and that's 100% true. Glenn Cook has put out plenty of other different things in the fantasy genre. But if he still plans to get these out, I mean, the clock is ticking. He's now 80. And while he is still technically a practicing author, when you're that old, you just don't know what's going to happen. So we don't know if we're going to get those last books. But as long as he's alive, there's still hope. And in some cases, we've even seen books published posthumously. We'll talk more about that later on this list. But come on, Glenn Cook, give us at least the next one. Number 17 is Dune by Frank Herbert. So here's the first of the top 20 that I have actually already read. For purposes of this list, I'm considering the Dune nomination as just for the core series of 8 books. So I'm not including the expanded Dune universe of prequels and filler novels, things where they're just adding more pieces to the story about characters we've met in the core books. Not that those books are bad. In fact, I love the first 2 prequel trilogies, but they do have a different tone and writing style than the core series. The first 6 books in this classic and incredible science fiction fantasy series were written by Frank Herbert. starting in 1965, wrapping up in 1985. He was on record at that time with a plan for just one more book to complete this wonderful, incredible series. But sadly, he died unexpectedly as a complication of surgery shortly after book 6 was released. Jump ahead to 2006 and 2007, where Frank's son Brian, with the professional assistance of established author Kevin J. Anderson, goes ahead and publishes 2 more books to conclude the series, based on the notes and information that Frank had left behind. While they are a little different in style and tone, they could not replicate Frank's writing style. They do still solidly land the series. Give us the answers, bring it home. If you love Dune, particularly the ending books, the good news is that Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson have continued to create and publish all sorts of Dune universe books. The bad news is that if you're disappointed with their writing style and the decisions they've made, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson have continued to create and publish all sorts of Dune universe books. Number 16, The Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This is another that I have read already, but there's no way I consider this better than Dune. Alas, I'm not controlling the order. This is showing my integrity, people. This was sorted by the ratings from Goodreads, by all those who've already contributed their thoughts over there. The collective mass, they've decided Broken Earth is favored above Dune. I think that's just because Dune's been out longer and these people are reading new stuff and haven't read Dune. I can hope for that. However, let's not take away what the Broken Earth trilogy has as its due. It is groundbreaking. It's award-winning. It's science fiction fantasy, a trilogy that came out in 3 successive years, 2015, 2016, and 2017. For the first time ever for a trilogy, each book won that year's Hugo Award for Best Novel. The books are not merely praised for their story, but also for the technical side of their writing, with one key character's point of view written in second person, rather than the far more common first person or third person choices. Of course, some people dislike the books for that same writing choice, going, oh, this second person stuff drives me nuts. I had no trouble with that. I thought that was well done. The first book reads primarily like fantasy, but as you move further into the series, more and more you come to see the science fiction elements, to understand more deeply what that's all about, and especially as you're moving through the final book, The Stone Sky. Oh yeah, we've got all sorts of science fiction in the house. Number 15, Wayfarers by Becky Chambers. This 4-book science fiction fantasy, also identified as space opera, is also considered among the best of queer sci-fi fantasy. The series has been praised for its exceptional narrative and excellent characters. It was released from 2014 until it finished in 2021, and Wayfarers won the Hugo Award for Best Series already in 2019 after the 3rd book had been released. The series is now complete with that 4th and final book, so if you like to wait until things wrap up, this one is ready for you. Go enjoy a wonderful science fiction fantasy adventure. Number 14, The Sun Eater series by Christopher Rucchio. This is a 6-book series with one last novel planned for the near future. So it will become 7, and the author has said that will be the end of the series. This is another one that's a science fiction fantasy space opera. A lot to that. Spanning the galaxy in what Goodreads describes as the best possible blend of space opera and epic fantasy. Book 1 came out in 2018. Book 6 was just released this past April 2024. At the pace these have been written, we shouldn't have to wait very long for Book 7. In addition to the core novels, be sure to check the many accompanying short stories and novellas that are out there waiting for you. This has been on my TBR for a while now. I think I need to raise it higher. Number 13, The Bound and the Broken series by Ryan Cahill. Here's another one that's been on my TBR, already pretty high, and maybe needs to come more. I'm really looking forward to reading this one. As I studied it for here, I'm even more interested. It's got 3 books written from 2021 through 2023, and there are 2 more books officially planned to round out the series. There are also multiple novellas and short stories connected with this series. This seems to be a thing modern fantasy and sci-fi authors are doing. They just can't help themselves. There's more to write, and they just squeeze these little extra things in. We're talking epic fantasy here, and there are dragons. Yay! Who doesn't love their dragons? Plus, plenty of other fantastical characters, many that will make you feel right at home as a fantasy reader. But Cahill has definitely brought his own spin to the fantasy genre, and people just rave about these books. I'd like to move them, like I said, higher on my TBR, but I do really prefer to wait till a series is done. So when he's already said there's just 2 more to come, maybe I can wait until those 2 show up and then make it more of a priority. And it shouldn't take too much longer to finish, right? Right? Number 12, the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. Aha! One again that I've already read and didn't follow my own rule. More about that in a moment. But yeah, I just finished the most recent book in the series back in March. There are 6 books available in Red Rising Saga. This is a sci-fi fantasy series with dystopian elements, a touch of space opera, and definitely some dark elements. Zach likes to refer to this one as grimdark in space, and he's not wrong. The first trilogy completes a story arc. Then we pick up with the second half of the story after a time jump to move into book 4. Basically, the characters are given a little time to grow up a bit, and the world shifts around them a touch, not necessarily for the better. I found this highly addictive when I read the series. Hard to stop, hard to put it down, just wanted to keep pounding through. Some people find it too shallow, all about the action. Whatever. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm here for a good story, and this story rocks. Red Rising began in 2014, and the most recent book, Lightbringer, came out in 2023. We're hopeful for the concluding 7th book before the end of next year, 2025. See, this is where when I read something before it's done, I'm stuck like everybody else. I just have to wait. The author has not given us any solid hints or absolute guarantees of when it'll be out. We just have to hope we don't have to wait too long. Okay, that's it for the books that were only favorited by 2 different content creators. Next up, we've got 3 books that 3 different people submitted. First of those is number 11, The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. Not my favorite, that's for sure. But plenty of people love this series. I'll at least acknowledge it is beautifully written. But as I just said about Red Rising, I'm here for a good story, and I didn't find one in the Book of the New Sun. But others did, and that's how it ends up number 11 on this list. There's subjectivity in what we like, and just because I didn't like it doesn't mean it's not a good book and others don't find something to praise. The 4 novels that comprise the Book of the New Sun are considered science fiction fantasy, and they came out in 4 consecutive years, 1980 to 1983. That just blows my mind. These books are so dense, there's so much packed into them, and he just churned them out so fast. Gene Wolfe, holy cow. A sequel came out a little bit later, after the passing of 4 years, The Earth of the New Sun. I actually enjoyed that book more than the 4 original ones. It also helped me make a little more sense of what I'd read. The vocabulary used in this series, it is not for the faint of heart. You have to work to read this stuff. But hey, some people like a little pain. Number 10, Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. This is a four-book science fiction fantasy with a splash of space opera about it. Book one, Hyperion, won the 1990 Hugo Award for Best Novel of Science Fiction and Fantasy. The series came out 1989 through 1997. Zach has read these already, at least the first two. I know he read the first two. I think he read the whole thing, but liked the first two far more than the second two. They are still on my TBR, though somewhere in the top range. In the top range is a very relative term. I mean, I've got 1,400 books, more than 1,400 books on my TBR. So, near the top, that can be hundreds of books. Number 9, The Dark Tower by Stephen King. Aha! Another book series I've already consumed, and in this case, multiple times. This is King's masterful epic fantasy series, lauded by many, despised by others. I'm definitely in the lauded camp. I've very much appreciated and enjoyed this series, bizarre as it may be. The production of this book series is sort of convoluted. King started with the first book, The Gunslinger, back in 1982. He didn't finish the 7 books of the series until 2004, while King was just churning out so much else. At least a book a year. Some of those years he was putting out 2 books. And along the way, he almost dies, so we almost don't even get the rest of this incredible series. He had a single vehicle pedestrian accident where he was the pedestrian. Humorously, he actually writes that incident into this series. Only King, man. Stephen King made one more addition to The Dark Tower in 2012 with the publication of a novella, The Wind Through the Keyhole, that fits in between books 4 and 5 of this 7-book series. It's not a game changer, but if, like me, you enjoyed The Dark Tower, you're happy for a little bonus piece, and it just kind of, revisiting some of the characters we knew and loved. In addition to epic fantasy, there are definite elements of science fiction, westerns, and horror firmly embedded throughout The Dark Tower. It's so unique in this regard, which is what many of us enjoy about it. Also, Stephen King, he was being a bit Sanderson-like before Sanderson even started writing. So I think this really means Sanderson is being like Stephen King. What I'm referencing is Brandon Sanderson has his Cosmere, all these books that are interconnected and woven together. And, well, The Dark Tower is that for Stephen King. Nearly everything else he's written connects to The Dark Tower, from it to The Stand to Hearts in Atlantis, and on and on and on through his collection. There are so many ties to The Dark Tower. This is the series that ties it all together, and it's just amazing in the complexity of his design. Last thing to note about The Dark Tower, the ending. The ending of the final book. It's a zinger. People love it, or people hate it, and that includes huge Stephen King fans. It is a one-of-a-kind ending. Now on to the 2 series submitted as favorites by 4 content creators. First up at number 8, The Green Bones Saga by Fonda Lee. This is Asian urban fantasy, a trilogy described as a saga in the style of The Godfather, with intergenerational blood feuds, vicious politics, magic, and kung fu. So those 2 aren't so much The Godfather. The trilogy came out 2017 to 2021, and since then there's been another novella that came out and 4 prequel short stories. Zach has read this already, quite enjoyed it, said I'd love it, so it's high on my TBR. If I wasn't reading so many big honkin' books these days, especially the ones from the Malazan universe, I'd be sure I'd get to this series before the end of the year, but as it is, probably more likely 2025. Number 7 is the one this is sort of tied with, except number 7 gets a higher rating on Goodreads, and that would be The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. So speaking of big honking books, These things are monsters. This is epic fantasy, Sanderson's ultimate work, his opus. He started with the first one, The Way of Kings, in 2010. 4 books are already out, and you can already pre order the 5th book, which I have. That releases in December of this year, 2024. From Sanderson, we understand that that 5th book will complete the current story arc. So books 1 through 5 all tell one set story. Then there's going to be a time jump, and we're going to get another story arc, another set of 5 books. He's done this sort of thing before, so we get it, we understand. But that second 5 will then complete the rest of his vision for the Stormlight Archive. Or so he thinks at this point. Great. On his current pace of writing, I'll likely be 70 or older when he finishes, ultimately, the Stormlight Archive. Good thing I have plenty else to read along the way. I mentioned these are big, chunky books with tons of connections to other books of Sanderson's Cosmere. I've actually just recently begun a reread of The Way of Kings, kind of prepping for that December release of Book 5. And I have to say, this is my second time through The Way of Kings. It is tremendously better for me this time. Amazingly so. It rereads so well. Next up, 2 series favorited by 5 of these content creators. I just love both of them. First up at number 6 is Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. This is a series I'm currently reading, nearly halfway through the 9th of the 10 books. There are many more books in the Malazan universe, but Malazan Book of the Fallen is just these 10 primary novels. This is epic high fantasy, but also dark fantasy. Not grim dark, but there is a grit to this series that keeps it away from princesses and unicorns. None of that stuff. There's also a very entertaining level of low humor that balances out the darkness, so the reader gets a steady, balanced reading experience. Uniquely, there is no main protagonist in this series. I say uniquely, there are others like this, but not common. In this, nothing is even close to saying that guy or that gal is the protagonist. No, not at all. This is a story about the world in which Malazan Book of the Fallen takes place, and all those who live within it. The closest entity I might describe as a main character would be a specific group of the Malazan army, but that would be leaving so many others of significance out. I can't really do that. Let's just leave it as this being an extremely unique series. Erikson published Book 1, Gardens of the Moon, in 1999, and delivered the big finish, The Crippled God, in 2011. As I noted, I've not quite finished this massive series, and I do mean massive. The mass market paperback versions have 7 of the 10 books at over 1,000 pages, 5 of them over 1,200 pages, and they're dense reading. Now, I don't mean dense as hard to understand. It's just you can't fly through them because there's so much to absorb. He tends to jump between characters and plot groups and stuff often, and there's so much packed into it, so many details you don't want to forget that you have to take your time and pay attention. Once I finish these, this may become my favorite series ever. It already counts as one of my 3 top favorite series. I'd already pointed out in the last episode that the Dresden Files is one of my top 3. I said 2 more were to come, so here you go. Malazan is the second. You can probably guess the third, but it's still coming, so you'll have to wait to have confirmation. So the other favored series by 5 content creators, what could that be? And rated just a little higher on Goodreads than Malazan. Well, number 5, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This is a 5-book, definitely grimdark epic fantasy series. Sadly, only 5 books of the intended, promised 7 exist. And the author just keeps making promises about those last books. I'm almost done with The Winds of Winter, the title for book 6. He's supposedly been close to finishing that now for the last decade. Come on, George. He even has a tentative title out there for book 7, the conclusion of the series. So that might one day end up being out and called A Dream of Spring. The first book, A Game of Thrones, came out all the way back in 1996. And it was a game changer for the fantasy genre, in my opinion. He had just 2 years before book 2, another 2 years, and we had book 3. But then there was a 5-year gap before book 4 came along, and it took him 6 years to complete and publish book 5. I think we've waited long enough for book 6 now, as it's been 13 years. We're ready, George. Of course, we've gotten other excellent content in the meantime. HBO's Game of Thrones, and now House of the Dragon, 2 series that I've enjoyed. I wasn't so hot about the ending of Game of Thrones, though. The way that TV adaptation wrapped up could be part of why we're still waiting for the Winds of Winter. As some of you agree with me on this, I think George kind of piloted what he thought he was going to do to finish the books, and it fell flat. We didn't like it. I think he's been rewriting and trying to figure out a better way to end the series. All right, we've got 4 series left. There's just one series that was chosen by 6 content creators, and it's one that I guess I'm going to have to add back into my TBR because I'd removed it. This would be at number 4, Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. There are 5 sets of novels in this 16-book high fantasy series. That includes 4 trilogies and 1 quartet. The series begins with the Farseer trilogy, which started in 1995, and the entire arc of Realm of the Elderlings wraps up with the final book of the Fitz and the Fool trilogy in 2017. My problem with the Realm of the Elderlings is that I've only read the second trilogy, the Live Ship Traders trilogy. I did not know anything about Realm of the Elderlings. I just saw this trilogy in Barnes & Noble, picked it up, and read it. And it didn't really work for me. But with all the praise this series as a whole gets, I probably owe it to myself to start from the beginning and go all the way through, not just stick to one trilogy that some people think is the weaker part of the whole series. Besides, I'm sort of getting tired of everybody telling me how great this series is, and I just don't get it. So I should do something about that. We climb up one more notch for number 3. Number 3 was selected by 7 different content creators as one of their 3 faves, and that would be The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. No argument from me here. A series we all owe much to. Without its success, all the way back in the 50s, and still today, this still sells a ton of copies. We perhaps don't have fantasy fiction as a genre at all. I have a deep appreciation for The Lord of the Rings, having personally read it countless times. I cannot tell you how many times I've read it, though I have not reread it for many years now. And I'm not really eager to read it again. I've got the movies now, which are excellent adaptations. In fact, I'm going to be rewatching The Return of the King soon for content I'm doing with someone else. The Lord of the Rings, man, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I'm here for the story. And the story it tells is magnificent. Even though I don't necessarily want to read it again, I remember it beautifully. Love the story. The Lord of the Rings was published in 1954 and 1955. It came out as a trilogy. There's a whole story behind why it happened that way, but it ends up setting the example for many fantasy stories to follow, both in world building, in epic fantasy scope, but also just in literally a trilogy. Trilogies are very common now. Tolkien did it first, by accident. You can look that up if you want. Although, to be fair about The Lord of the Rings, it's almost 4 books. The Hobbit, it's a necessary prerequisite. It's a prequel. It's a great story on its own, but if you haven't read The Hobbit and you read The Lord of the Rings, you are missing key pieces of the story. Okay, that leaves us with the final 2 series, each submitted by 8 of the content creators. That's nearly 20% of the participants are saying these 2. Now, only one of them said it about both of them. Props to Fantology for having the pulse of people's favorite content. Fantology contributed 3 things like everyone else, but 2 of them are these in the top 2. What do we have? Sorted between the 2 by Goodreads fans. Number 2 is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and finished with the help of Brandon Sanderson. This is the other of my personal top 3. The Wheel of Time, you knew that. Come on. Now, I know a lot of you were thinking this is going to be the number 1 for sure. Well, if you were paying attention on Twitter, I had teased earlier today that some of you are going to be surprised. Surprise! The Wheel of Time, man, it is a great series. It has so much to it. I've read this many, many times. And of course, Zach and I are reading through it again as we do deep dives as a thread on this channel. We're currently on book 7, A Crown of Swords. There's so much to find in this epic fantasy. It has the most incredible characters, complex foreshadowing, and multi-layered plot going all over the place following different characters in so many ways. This is a series that is great reading the first time, but on a reread, it just blows your mind how much Jordan packed into it. Details. There's 14 books, plus a prequel that dropped mid-series. The first book, The Eye of the World, came out in 1990. Robert Jordan published his 11th in the series, not counting the prequel, in 2005, with a plan to write just one more to wrap up this whole thing with its epic conclusion. Sadly, just months after the book Knife of Dreams came out there, book 11, Jordan was diagnosed with a terminal illness, 2006, and he was gone already by 2007. Compared to others with that illness, he went really quickly. His fans owe him a great debt because as his health is declining, even as he's sitting in the hospital, he's working diligently, trying to share all the things that are in his head that people need to know so that someone else can finish this series. He did not leave us hanging. Literally, up to the day he died, he's still answering questions, dictating information to the people on Team Jordan ready to help get this thing finished. So, after he's gone, his estate hires Brandon Sanderson to come in, take his notes, take everything he dictated, take all the information that's available in his study, and write the last book. And there's so much sitting there, it was impossible. Brandon Sanderson writes 3 more novels, all of them huge, chunky books, but delicious, wonderful. So thankful we got the finish. The final book, A Memory of Light, coming out in 2013. Currently, this is my all-time favorite series of my top 3, but I haven't finished Malazan Book of the Fallen. I'm close. Once I do, I may have some deciding to do. Okay, finally, of the entire 80 books that were submitted, the one above them all, the one favorited by as many content creators as The Wheel of Time, but rated just a tad higher by Goodreads reviews and ratings. The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. This is the ultimate grimdark fantasy, and if you aren't comfortable with gritty, dark, dirty characters and plot lines where terrible things happen, especially to those who try to be genuine good guys, then this is not for you, but it's for a lot of people. Number 1. First Law begins with the original First Law trilogy, 2006 to 2008, and to be honest, that's all I've read so far. The rest is still waiting on my TBR. Abercrombie followed this original trilogy with 3 standalone novels in the same world, 2009 through 2012. Then he throws us a short story collection, Sharp Ends, in 2016. A second trilogy, The Age of Madness, was published over 3 consecutive years, 3 consecutive Septembers. He was right on point. 2019, 2020, and 2021. Then he took a year off. And in September of 2023, we get The Great Change and Other Lies, another short story collection from the First Law universe. Abercrombie has strongly hinted that we can expect more to come for the First Law series. But he's taken a pause right now as he's working on other things that he's going to be putting out. And that's good. That's very good. I need time to catch up. Read the rest of these books. Whew, there's our list. Links to where you can get these 20 series are all conveniently located in the show notes for you. So, you've got the complete top 80 favorites of 45 different content creators now, and a powerful top 20. Do you have thoughts about these? Put them down in the comment box. You know I respond. And while you're looking at the comment box, also check out the show notes for the details on how you can connect with Zach and I, our Discord server, social media, even our email. And if you've really appreciated this series, consider showing your appreciation another way. Become one of our Patreon supporters. A link to our Patreon page is down there. And thank you to those of you who already monthly support us on Patreon. Thanks for watching, everyone. This has been a hoot. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll talk to you next time.